Good morning. Matthew chapter 22. Starting in verse 34. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. They were happy about this. The Pharisees and Sadducees didn't really get along. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, and saying, Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said to him, You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. What does this say? Oh, I have a quote here. Ed Glasscock, religious zeal is not a substitute for correct theology. Ooh. Now, the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And that's a quote of Leviticus 19:18. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Yep, just making sure verse 41 is the next section, so I'll stop right there. So, sorry. I was exercising, so I'm just a little hot. It's hot outside. Anyone notice that? Or maybe it's just me? Probably in the north side of town. So, it's a lawyer. They're trying to trick him. They're trying to corner him. They're trying to get Jesus, to say something that will upset the crowds. And so, what is the greatest law? Now, there are 613 Levitical laws. Talked a bunch about this at our youth study last night. There's the 10 commandments, but there's 603 more. Now, we're told that if you break any one of the commandments, you're guilty of breaking them all. I mean, that was the idea. It wasn't just a matter of, these versus those, but it was all God's commandments. And so for him to ask Jesus to list what's the greatest, in many ways, it would have been kind of breaking the rule. I mean, in the sense, they were all God's commandments. And there wasn't really one that was any greater than the others. They were all to be obeyed. Put it that way. They're all to be obeyed. And so when Jesus picks his two responses, he doesn't pick commandments. The two things he replies with are not on that list of 613. And the first thing he quotes is the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. And it's interesting that here he puts mind and doesn't say strength. Now, in Mark chapter 12, I'll flip on over there. Mark chapter 12, he says, you shall love with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And so, here we have Mark's connection. And it's interesting that, Matthew probably was there, Mark wasn't. It's interesting, but regardless, he did say mind, and then he adds in strength there. But he's adding in mind, and that was not in the original section. And I think part of it is reminding the Pharisees. You see, Paul the Apostle said that he would not have known, that God could see his heart, his mind, other than that 10th commandment, you shall not covet. You see, the other commandments you could witness of the 10. Murder, you can watch that. Adultery, that can be proven. Stealing, you're caught. But covetousness, that's something in the heart. And Paul's like, that's when I realized that God saw my heart. And my heart and my mind, these inward things, God's watching those too. And I think many of the Pharisees, they thought they were perfect on the outside. that they had all their ducks in a row. They looked good to everyone else. And so when Jesus throws mind in here, it reminds them that it's not just on the outside. It's what's on the inside that counts as well. In verse 40, he says that on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Now, to a Jew, they understand that phrase. The law would be the books of Moses, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. The prophets are all the other writings of the prophets. And so between all of that, you would get all of these commands and things that they knew they were supposed to do. And so Jesus says, if you love God and if you love your neighbor, you've got it all figured out then. There's nothing else to worry about. Truthfully, if you just love God, the first commandment, well, you'll love his kids. You'll love his creation. So you could almost even just narrow it down to the one. But Jesus does give us the second one here as well. And if you look at the 10 commandments, you can break it down into these 2 categories. The first 4 commandments are loving God. So love the Lord your God, right? Have no other God beside him. Create no graven image, right? We have blasphemy in the Sabbath. Not take his name in vain, remembering the day to worship him. Those are the first 4. They're all about loving God. And then the latter 6 are all about loving your neighbor, right? Your parents, and murder and adultery and lying and stealing and covetousness, and you go down the line, right? It's all about loving other people and the way we act and behave towards others. You can boil down all the law with just even one word: love. That's what Jesus is saying. All the law and the prophets, everything can be boiled down to loving God, loving your neighbor. It's all boiled down to love. And biblical love is not a feeling, it's an action. It's a verb. It's something you do. It's not just how you feel. And when you look at 1 Corinthians 13, that whole chapter on agape love, in the old King James, they translate it charity, because charity is when we give things away, right? We give it to charity. We're giving it away as a gift, and it's something that belonged to us, but we're giving it up for them. The old King James translated that word charity because that kind of love is much like charity. Agape love, the love as Christians we're called to, it's about sacrificing and giving away things that other people have not earned. They don't deserve it. We just do it. We love. And God demonstrates that for us. By this we know love. 1 John 3:16, right? That he gave his life for us. And we ought to lay our lives down for one another. That's the idea, is that God laid down his life in Jesus to demonstrate love for us. So here are the Pharisees, people who are, a lawyer. And it wasn't like a lawyer like I think you're thinking, no, so much is law. I'm sure it's involved because really the religious leaders were the judicial leaders in that time. They didn't have, politics and the church. It was politics and the church was one thing to the Jew. But these lawyers, they weren't just lawyers like defending this guy and the prosecutor and whatnot. It was someone who was an expert at the law. And that was what they did. They knew the law, God's law, and they could make the right decisions, and they knew the loopholes and the way around God's law. And that was his whole mindset. How can I manipulate God's law to make my life okay? How can I do things in such a way that God's law, and Jesus says it's just about love, sacrificing, serving, loving. Love God and love everyone else. You do these 2 things, and you don't need to worry about a single other command in the Bible as far as, I'll take that back. Period. If you can focus on just loving God and everyone else, you don't need to worry about a single other command of the Bible. People who love pray for each other. People who love share the gospel with the lost. People who love are not mean to other people. People who love are giving. If you just focus on loving, everything else will fall into place. So there you go. Sorry I was a little late today. I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. You guys take care, and I'll see you guys then. Adios.